Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If we have a worldwide audience, welcome from wherever you are. I'm Joshua Cole, and I am going to be your host for today's discussion. Thank you all for joining us. And it wouldn't be an Assura event if I didn't have slides. So I'm going to have a few slides, but there's mostly going to be discussion. So just hang tight. Want to do some logistics really quickly. If I can get my CTO hat on and make the tech work the way that I want it to. So welcome to this discussion. It's about AI and it becoming a business in cyber risk, and we want to discuss what executives must govern now. So there's going to be about 45 minutes of introduction and discussion, well, about 10 minutes of Q&A, followed by about 5 minutes of quick wrap up, which is to say that we're going to encourage you to attend more of these webinars and discussions. So if you look at the top of your Microsoft Teams page, you'll see there's a Q&A button. Please use that to submit questions during the webinar. We may, just by virtue of the fact of our discussion, answer your question, but don't let that stop you from submitting that question anyway. We want to hear from you. We want this to be interactive. Again, this is a discussion. So let me introduce you to our panel of experts. First, there is me, although I think it's maybe overstating it for me to claim to be an expert and also to be moderating this panel. But nevertheless, I am Joshua Cole. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer of Assura. We are a cybersecurity services firm that's headquartered in the beautiful state of Virginia in Richmond, right in the center of the state. Joining me is my colleague, Brett Baichi. He is the Vice President of Enterprise Solutions and Assura's Chief Information Security Officer as well. So he helps us make sure that we are eating our own dog food when it comes to cybersecurity, governance, risk, and compliance, and technology. We also have Brian Ilg. He is the CRO of Babel AI. Babel is a consultancy and audit firm that assists organizations with the strategic and ethical adoption of artificial intelligence technology. And then last but certainly not least, and the only person on the panel with some of his hair remaining on his head, is George Totev. He is the Chief Information Security Officer of Trustero, and Trustero is the publisher of a cyber governance, risk, and compliance platform that uses agentic AI, and yes, we will talk about what agentic AI is, to help organizations manage their cybersecurity program. So let's set the stage and go into some terms, just so we're all on the same page. So the first term that I want to make sure we're all familiar with is AI, artificial intelligence. I don't think I need to belabor this. It's not like it hasn't been in the news for the last, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years, and many years before that. But I think you would have to be living under a rock, and besides, you wouldn't have signed up for this webinar if you hadn't heard about AI and had some familiarity with what it is. Now, under AI, there are several different types of artificial intelligence, the most common of which is machine learning. And machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence where you feed models data, and then based on that data, it can infer different things and different patterns in other data that it sees based on the data that it's been trained on. So for instance, Assura, for many, many years, we've used machine learning technology as part of our threat detection business. And so it's where we use it. We use ML in order to, as somebody once said to me, try to find the needle in the needle stack. So when you're doing threat detection, you don't want to only detect the known knowns. You want to detect the things that are new and novel that may be also suspicious. And machine learning helps to enable that. So machine learning, you can use something called a neural network. And a neural network is a type of artificial intelligence technology that's meant to mimic the way that the human brain works. So it takes the data that's been fed to it, that's been trained on, and then a neural network then infers different things based on subsequent data that's been fed into it. So for instance, in the case of logs, it can infer cyber attacks based on the machine learning models that on machine learning. So now the big thing that's hit the scene in the last several years is generative AI. And so that uses machine learning, neural networks, and that sort of thing to take what it knows and what it's been trained on, and then for people to ask it to then produce original content based on the data that it's been trained on. So it can produce text, it can produce images, it can produce these days video, and other types of things. And those generative AI engines that we've heard of, like ChatGPT and Claude and those sorts of things, they use something called a large language model. And a large language model is used by Gen AI to basically help to take human language and then to use that to as the basis of generating the content that's asked of it. So let's move on and let's talk about kind of where AI is in terms of its life cycle. So I love this particular graphic because it shows the general pattern of technological adoption. And so you can actually apply this. This is called an S curve. And you can apply an S curve to pretty much every technological advancement in human history. So think about automobiles in the late part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century. Think about PCs and electronic mail and mobile technology and social media. All of those things generally follow an S curve. And so breaking down this S curve, at the lower left-hand portion of it are the early adopters. And then at the upper right-hand portion is when that technology becomes societally ubiquitous. Everybody knows about it, everybody's using it in one way or another, and it is no longer new and novel. From the standpoint of generative AI, really the inflection point was in November of 2022 when ChatGPT was introduced by OpenAI, and that hit the market. So after that, where are we? And in my opinion, and I've seen a lot of these S curves when it comes to technology over my years in tech, I think we're about here. We're not at the inflection point, but there's still a lot of growth and maturity yet to go, and before it becomes ubiquitous throughout society. Yes, it is growing very fast, but it hasn't hit that ubiquity point yet. Now, with all new technologies, there's a double-edged sword. So there's certainly a lot of promise when it comes to generative AI and this technology. Enhanced productivity is a huge one. Enhanced creativity, though some artists would say that it's not really original creativity, um, that's the promise of it. Helping to solve complex problems like finding new treatments for diseases, suggesting innovations like ways to ed- um, improve business processes, um, suggesting innovations, new and novel technologies. In fact, there's a company that I had a conversation with about almost exactly a year ago today, where they were talking about using generative artificial intelligence to help them to develop and innovate a new style of battery that had much longer life and was more ecologically friendly than the batteries that are currently on the market. It's used in fraud detection. It's used to reduce product errors. Now, let's talk about the other edge of that sword. And the other edge of that sword are all of the things listed here that you probably heard about, or maybe some are new to you. Um, Hallucinations. They're early on, there was I believe, an attorney in New York City that was caught using AI to generate a legal brief and cited cases that did not exist. So AI making stuff up, bias, huge environmental impact with all of the data centers that are being built in order to feed this engine. In fact, you may have heard about one particular one that was built sort of off book and is now polluting a neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee. If you haven't tried to buy a PC in recent, or a server in recent memory, you'll know that the prices have gone up incredibly because there is a huge shortage of RAM, of solid state storage, and of GPUs. And this is because the companies that are building these AI data centers have already bought the bought the inventory through 2027 on these things. Of course, you've heard about worker displacement, layoffs, people being fearful of their jobs, a more dangerous cybersecurity landscape because new and novel attacks are being perpetrated, and they're being perpetrated a lot faster using artificial intelligence, unethical use or misuse, deep fakes, AI slop. An example of AI slop is the photo that gets posted to social media, and that everybody has 6 fingers on each hand instead of 5. So with all of that, that is the present, as I see it, the present landscape. So let's now go and move into our panel discussion. And so, George, I'm going to start with you. One of the things that did not define, and I want to unpack, and I've been hearing about more and more in the last 18 months, are AI agents and agentic AI. Can you kind of unpack what those terms mean and what that is?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me, Josh. This is going to be an interesting discussion. So agents are essentially programs that are using AI on the back end. So the difference, you really nicely kind of lay out the field of what machine learning is, what LLMs and agentic AI is. Agents actually do work for us. So on the back end, they may use different models. Those could be large language models, but not necessarily large language models. For example, large language models are not very good at large data when it happens that it has to be contextualized. So there are other ways to do it. We are all familiar with generating pictures. Those are also models, but they're not language models. So there could be different models that sit on the back end of the agent. And based on the instructions, the agents do work. They can also talk to each other. They can specialize. Nowadays, we started talking about multi-agent platforms. There are a lot of benefits of the agent. So I guess a lot of us, when we say I think about things like ChatGPT or Claude, where you actually interact with the system, you can interact with the agent, or the agent can do work based on events, based on conditions. So you may not even see it that it does its work. So think of a agent as another member of your team who does something and specializes in something. In fact, the latest trend is for us to have specialized agents. There are certain benefits to that. So, for example, you have an agent that specializes in SOC, for example, it's Security Operations Center, that looks specifically for anomalies. There is another agent that is really good at testing code. So this narrow specialization of the agent, first of all, make it more productive, make it more accurate, but also one of the concerns that you had in the beginning around hallucination. That's another example when the hallucination actually goes significantly down when you narrow the focus field of the agent. And they can talk to each other, they can organize themselves. If you're familiar with self-organizing teams, for example, that concept in management where you have people specializing in different areas and they organize themselves to produce something or to accomplish a goal, you can do exactly the same thing with the agent. So it is kind of almost like the cutting edge at the moment, agents and how the agents organize themselves. As you can see, I'm putting my security hat now. As you can see, there are a lot of challenges here because, for example, the platforms that came out lately, the idea is that the agent takes your identity and acts upon your identity. So everything that you can do and you have access to, the agent can do. So we have to be really careful about that. There is a lot of talk in the security field how to address this thing. So maybe similar to how you have an assistant, the assistant has a different identity and acts under that identity. Probably we have to do something similar with the agents. So there is a lot of benefits and issues of using agents.
Excellent. Thank you, George. So, Brian, I'm going to sort of pass it over to you now. And, given the lay of the land and the technological landscape with this and agentic AI and all of that, you and your colleagues at Babel see a lot of different ways that AI is being applied um, to um, different business problems. So can you share some of those ways that AI is being applied to those problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do at Babel AI is we're a third-party audit firm. So we're auditing the outputs of these different AI models. We can help with set up management systems. So we are helping organizations kind of the full use case, whatever they can think of in terms of how can I apply AI to my business. So the first thing is always, you know, taking into consideration that every business has its own unique context. So however you can think about using AI, this is the creativity unlock. However we can think about automating this, how can we build an agent to do this specific task for us? We see a lot of those applications. One that is very common at Babel, and I'll just focus on it because we have good use cases, is automating the resume screening process for HR. And this is one that, again, we're auditors and we kind of set the bar, and we're out doing this audit before a lot of people were back in 2023. New York local law 144 is the regulation where if you're using AI to automate the decision-making process, or you parsing, ranking, sorting any sort of resume, you have to be able to measure and make sure that you're not impacting anybody in the resume screening process. And there's already class action lawsuits out on this. There's a couple of them. And what's happening is you're finding a lot of historical data being used into those models, and it's creating bias or inaccurate responses. And we're helping organizations spot and identify those ahead of time. So we do a lot of risk assessments, a lot of impact assessments. We make sure that the governance and the outputs are not going to create some sort of unintended action. And then we actually do the technical testing as well. So we've helped a lot of different, just on that specific use case there, a lot of organizations, bring in that technology and save a lot of time in that screening process. I know hiring's under a lot of scrutiny with AI, but it's been, that's probably the best one I can give off the top of the head.
That brings up a sort of an interesting question about use cases. And so I've read a lot of press about failed pilots. And so maybe George can, and I'll actually, and Brian and Brett as well. What are some examples of what you would consider to be um, bad use cases of AI and good use cases of AI?
You're bringing a really good point, Josh. It's governance. So just haphazardly starting to deploy AI for the sake of AI leads to those use cases that you mentioned, the bad use cases. So the best way to approach it is to think about, to align it with the strategy of the company. So like what you're trying to do as a company, and then figure out AI as a technology, how it's going to help you. Um, I've seen cases, for example, when it comes from the board and the executives, we have to start using AI to increase productivity. There is this fund that we put aside, figure out use cases. I don't think that is a good approach because it doesn't really align with the strategy of the company. A much better approach would be to examine, okay, what are the areas where we can use AI and advance our business. So, for example, AI is really good at analyzing large chunks of data, finding patterns. So think about what are those mundane tasks within the organization, repetitive mundane tasks that require knowledge from a lot of different sources, and see how AI can optimize that. On the other hand, if you have something that is more creative at the moment, something that really has um, to use unorthodox processes that are hard to define, hard to put in an algorithm. For those one, AI can be used as an assistant, but AI cannot really do it. So their biases also are really important. You were mentioning this one. I remember, probably 10, 15 years in the era before ChatGPT, when we're still using machine learning. There were this example where a financial organization tried to optimize the loan initiation. So you know how the loan officer reviews the parameters of the loan and they decide what is going to be the interest rate and all those kind of things. So they loaded data from the past 100 years of how they initiated loans. They started the pilot and they shut down the pilot a month later because it turned out that they had a huge racial bias, because the data that they fed into the model also had a racial bias. So identifying those areas where you deal with a lot of data, analyzing a lot of data, that is mundane, repetitive process, but also when you feed in the model, what kind of steps you take to reduce the bias, to increase the accuracy, to increase the consistency, to reduce the hallucination, all of those things. So there is a governance area and there is the technology area. And speaking of governance, that is the kind of, I've seen the approach that is working. Figuring out what are the use cases, and based on those use cases, you develop what are going to be your policies. And we can talk about that later, what kind of policies and how you address the risk.
And actually, that's you know, I don't want to give short shrift to that. In fact, that's a good sort of segue into something that I was thinking about when we, you said governance was the first word out of your mouth. And I don't think that was just because that was part of the title of this conversation. But Brian, can you define for us what good AI governance looks like and what the components are of that?
Yeah, and it's good to call this out. So when the difference between like an audit of a model versus governing the entire kind of global use case of AI within your organization, those are two separate things. A good what is standing out kind of globally as the leader in terms of the management system or the governance system is ISO 42001. So I would just start with saying, if you're not familiar with ISO 42001, it's an AI management system similar to how they have information security management system for 27001. That's a good way to think about it. So that would be a great place to start and learn about that. But just to tee it up, I have kind of the 8 core things that if someone were to ask me that exact question, it always starts with inventory. You know, you got to have a system of record, central registry of all your AI assets and projects. You have to have visibility, a risk tier rubric. So within your organization, what is that kind of framework for assigning low, medium, high risk, and that's gonna, what are the impacts associated with those? An intake and approval gate. Work with a couple of companies, and sometimes they're like, yeah, our approval process is the guy in the back said he found ChatGPT and he wants to use it, and the manager said yes. And I'm like, there's probably some risk there. Data and privacy basics, right? Yeah, like people aren't as prepared as you might think, but know that you can always get better. But your controls and your data handling, consent, those data and privacy basics, still need to have those. If you're bringing technology in, a testing protocol, some sort of minimum testing protocol that it has to go through to be approved. I would suggest a lightweight model card, which helps kind of just like clearly identify that like concisely the documentation for the purpose and the limits so that anybody can see that quickly. Monitoring and change controls. So ongoing performance tracking, what does right look like, version control, version management, and then kind of an incident run book. What happens if something doesn't work right? What do we do? And again, the thing here is when you're thinking governance, you're thinking this needs to be defensible to a regulator, some sort of outside scrutiny, and can you support that? That it's not just policies. This is super important, specifically with ISO, that it's not just policies that sit on a shelf somewhere, it's operationalized, your people understand it. So within all of that, user training is kind of the last thing. Do the people understand what is in the governance structure? I think that's always kind of the forgotten, last step is making sure that all your people understand what's going on.
And Brian,
Well,
if I
and
can, sorry, Josh, if I can add
yeah,
one to this, which is really important because you, Josh, was actually really showing where we are on the cycle of the technology. It is really important to factor in that the governance will have to evolve. What we're seeing today and the model that we put today will not be sufficient 6 months from now.
right, right, absolutely, because this is a moving target.
Yes.
That we are in that upslope on the adoption curve and the technology curve, and so it's just like I know for me as a chief technology officer that just when I think I have a handle on things, the bar moves, and the goalposts move, and so it's you're absolutely right. And Brian, you made a really good point about the defensibility, and you gave an example of where it's not just defensibility with an auditor or a regulator; it's a potentially defensibility in court
Yeah.
in front of a jury, right? And so those are all of the things to keep in mind that I think are really good to keep in top of mind as organizations adopt this. And so, Brian, you also mentioned something about a registry of the sort systems of record and that sort of thing. And that if you thought shadow IT was a problem, Now we have shadow AI to
Oh yeah.
contend with as technologists and security practitioners. And the whole thing, it throws a whole new dimension into supplier risk and all of that sort of thing. And so, Brett, what would you recommend to organizations that are tackling that issue? What are the things they need to be looking out for?
Yeah, so like I love all the talk about governance. What George said about, good use cases, bad use cases. I'm all about that. So I love AI where it can be a force multiplier, where it helps us keep people doing interesting work and let the AI do the boring work. That's great. But foundational to that governance that Brian and George have both talked about is always going to be that information security foundational layer. So the information security program you have, the GRC program that you already have built or are building, is foundational to all of that governance. So to Brian's point, like you specifically just now asked about third-party risk. So in third-party risk, you got to understand when you're doing that risk assessment, what are the AI data flows going to be? What's the retention policies where you're going to have it? Where is that data going to be stored? So are you in a public LLM? That's not great if you're having any sort of confidential information. Are you in a privately hosted one in Azure? Are you running your own small language models? Like where are you hosting this data does matter, because how you where you put your sensitive data can have an impact on accidental exposure, on injection attacks, on poisoning, on different things that will have a negative impact. So having those strong security controls around data handling, having those strong security controls, like for the agentic AI, like you have to treat them like they're highly privileged users. There's a comical or if not ironic story that came out a couple of weeks ago about an AI researcher that set an AI tool to pruning her email box, so it deleted all of it. You got to be thoughtful in what you do. Shadow AI is bad. But more seriously, like the controls you have around least privilege, the controls you have around enterprise risk management, how you manage that risk register, it's not different because of AI, but AI amplifies massively because of the speed at which it can execute, because of the hallucinations, because of the biases, because of the agentic nature of it. It can absolutely amplify the impacts of those risks, if they do come to fruition. So having that well-managed program underneath to layer that governance on is really important. So whether you're an ISO-based shop, layering on ISO 42001, whether you're a NIST-based shop, layering ISO 42001, or 853, they have draft AI controls coming out as well. There's a lot of different approaches you can take, but creating that management structure that Brian talks about, and that management system, both on the IT security side and then layering on the control of it through AI governance, is really important.
So, Brett, you mentioned something, and I don't want to give it short shrift, and that is public versus private LLMs. And so maybe you can unpack that a little bit, and what that means, and what organizations should be on the lookout for, and why that's a problem potentially.
Yeah. So LLMs are, like ChatGPT, are constantly being trained, right? And, George and Brian, feel free to jump in wherever you want, but they're constantly being trained and they're learning from all the information that you provide to it. So when you say, let's say you have some confidential information and you're just, like, what, I'm going to go out to ChatGPT. I've got a consumer account there. I got the pro level account. I'm going to go in and I'm going to put this confidential information, trade secrets, financial information, whatever, in here because I need it to analyze it for me. Well, it's learning from that, and it's storing that information permanently. So you're losing control of that information. So now, from a data governance standpoint and from a privacy standpoint, you run the risk of it being exposed because creative actors are able to figure out how to bucket into telling you those things. You lose, especially if you're working in regulated environments, you lose control over that data, and you have zero data governance, to what Brian's been talking about, because you can't control where it goes once you've exposed it to that LLM. So the next thing that you can do that's helpful is companies like Anthropic, like OpenAI, they offer enterprise accounts. Now, when you start using an enterprise account, they're now guaranteeing you certain protections around how your data is used, and where it's stored and how long it's stored and the destruction of that data. Those are all controls that exist, surprisingly, in your information security program. And so, as you talk about third-party risk management and that sort of thing, you start to understand and better where it is when you go to one of those enterprise accounts. And then even farther down the line, you can say in Azure and AWS, you can host your own copies of OpenAI's, ChatGPT, of Claude, et cetera. And those run within the context of your tenant. And at that point, the OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world don't even have access to the queries that you make. There's zero visibility into what you're using. So it's really a much more private scenario, but there's also cost and management involved so you have to consider, there's this matrix of, what type of data am I protecting? And as you need to protect that data more and more, you're moving into, from consumer into the enterprise accounts, into the hosted LLMs, and maybe into your own custom hosted LLM. Versus, and but there's also the complexity and cost consideration. So finding that sweet spot that works for your organization and putting controls around what you are and aren't allowed to input into it and that sort of thing will all play into that decision process.
So it almost sounds like that. What's the old refrain? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Yes.
With the free versions of
Indeed.
ChatGPT or Claude or any of these others, right? They need those models to evolve their corpus of knowledge. They need your data.
Mhm.
That is the and who said it? Data's the new oil. That hasn't changed. So it sounds like, as we're talking about this, if you have a really good cybersecurity governance, you have a really good cybersecurity program where you have really good a good permissions model around your data and that sort of thing, that the lift doesn't have to be very heavy in order to then safely adopt AI. Or am I hallucinating? And I'm opening the floor today.
Yeah, Josh, you're not. And actually, while I was listening to Brett, I remember having similar conversations, I don't know, 15 years ago when cloud was coming in. So I guess nothing new under the sun.
Right.
There are a lot of tools and methodologies that we can borrow from the existing risk management. Like all these things that we were talking about, third party, cloud, training, all of that stuff we can borrow. But we have to be cognizant that there are some specifics around AI that are new. So I'm all for ISO 42001, Brian. Actually, we're thinking of adopting it as well. Because even if you don't get certified in 42001, it gives you really good framework for management. So you should definitely consider adopting the methodologies for 42001 or from NIST. NIST also is coming up with the AI framework. But just be cognizant that, first of all, we're in the beginning of the curve. And by definition, all of these frameworks are behind the cutting edge. So they just have to see what is happening before they publish their work. And those frameworks are just a baseline. They're a good starting point. So the fact that you have ISO 42001 and you're certified in 42001 doesn't mean that you're absolutely effective at governing your AI risks. So that is something that we have to think about. The other thing that is kind of specific about AI is that it is in between technology and humans. So up until now, we've been dealing with technology, with predictive technology. AI, by definition, is non-deterministic, which means that there are characteristics that are closer to a human actor than to a code. So that is something we have to really think about when we apply methodologies and controls and tools relate to code, and when we have to go to our HR friends and say, okay, how do I deal with this problem? Because it looks more like a HR problem rather than a technology problem.
Yeah, and that non-deterministic nature of I guess means that you can ask ChatGPT or Claude the
Yeah.
same question the same way several different times and get completely different answers. So,
Or
right,
conversely, go to ChatGPT and ask for a random number, and it's going to give you 47.
right, it'll give you the same
Right?
one every time
Give
because
you the
it's
same
not
one.
right.
So going back to what problem you're trying to solve and whether AI is the best tool.
Right, right. So what do and is that really what it comes down to, is just making sure that you really understand, like how does an organization work around or through those limitations as they're doing their adoption?
Are you
Uh-oh,
asking
did
me?
I'm asking the panel. Well, what's I'm throwing it open.
I'd say start small. That's the best way to go, right? So, back to what you said in your opening remarks, George, is the problem has to be as specific as possible. That's going to give you the best statistical likelihood that you're going to hit your mark, with AI being that it's probabilistic, non-deterministic, right? And it's going to change over time. But being able to, measure that outcome, and this goes back to the HR comment, like how do you measure the output of the work being done by an agent or some sort of AI system? It's, hey, 95% of the time, that's good enough for the organization. That's something that your legal team's going to have to weigh in on and say, yep, we're going to be able to push back with confidence on any sort of regulatory scrutiny. But that's kind of where you get into your governance and your policies and kind of the really high risk spaces. And what AI is, the whole, big crazy part about it is it's making judgments and decisions based on inputs from users, stored data, all of these kind of historical decisions. So to your point about we had to shut down that model that, there's a lot of, bias and the data sets before that we found, it's going to amplify anything that lives in the, all the skeletons in the closet. So start small and really trying to think about small sections of your workflow or different parts of your business, and then build, right? That's definitely what I would suggest. And again, taking your own context and your own risk profile, everybody's different.
Yeah, and I would say for me, an extension of that start small is implement thoughtfully, but fail fast. Don't fall into the sunk cost fallacy and like, well, I've put this much work into it, I can make it work, I can make it work. Uh, it might know that you can't because of bias, because of other things, and you do have to pull it out. There's that interesting case with Workday, where they're being sued for ageism in their ATS, which is not good. And so being thoughtful about the places you can put it in. And, I like what George said, by the way, about how just because you have all these controls in place doesn't mean you're safe. Yes, it's a game of risk management, right? That's what all of information security is. And so the nice thing about the management systems that you put in place, whether on the InfoSec side or on the the AI governance side, is there's a heavy focus on continuous improvement with that input from leadership and that buy-in, that ownership and leadership. So yeah, it's not going to be perfect ever. No information security program is perfect. And there's a huge difference between compliance, right, and security, but it's that continuous improvement that's important, and adding it in where it makes sense. Find the places where, honestly, in the beginning, the least probability of error. Like, if you're gonna have it make decisions, are you able to defend that in court? What's the defensibility of it? Et cetera. And so find those places that don't necessarily have that, but still amplify the capabilities of your team.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
so it makes particularly when we're talking about adoption of agentic AI. It seems like it would be human nature to let there be a good deal of autonomy. That those agents have a good deal of autonomy, and so one of the questions that I have is, where do the human beings come in to make sure that the machines are doing what they're supposed to be doing?
So, Josh, this is a really interesting problem because we're talking about defensibility. In order for us to be able to defend something, we should understand it. So if the model spits out a result, it may be the correct result, but we have no idea how it came up with that result. So it's really, really important, especially in the agentic space, to have the reasoning displayed and references to where that reasoning came from. So that goes to the human in the loop problem, that you want the human to actually look into this thing and say, yep, that makes a lot of sense. I checked, it looks good. I can explain it, I can defend it. Now, there is a fallacy here, and that's where it becomes really interesting, different than all the previous technologies, is that there is a strong psychological effect here. Because even if in the audit space, if you look at how auditors approach automated controls, they test it once and they say, because it's automated control, that applies to the entire population. I don't need to do sampling. That is not the case with the AI. So what could happen is, for example, AI is used to do peer review for code checking. And you put a human in the loop, so the AI does the peer review, and then there is a human to actually does the review and approves it. And in 99% of the cases, the AI does the good job. It actually catches the issues, it fixes, it does a good job. It does what a good developer would do. But that would create a complacency in the human, because 99 times you get good result from the AI and you start kind of a slacking and you miss the 100th time. So that's how our brain works. So we have to be careful about those kind of psychological effects of the AI. And we have methodologies, again, that we can borrow from the existing cases. For example, you can deploy something like a chaos monkey, which injects issues in those peer reviews so that you keep the human alert. And there are ways to do it, but we just have to be aware of the fact that it's technology, but it's not like every other technology that we've seen before.
Chaos monkey. That's a new term for me. I like that. I think we need more chaos monkeys in our lives, or maybe fewer. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know from chaos monkeys. Yeah. So we're at 12 minutes to 12 Eastern, and so I want to open this up to the audience and have them, give them an opportunity to stump the chumps, as I like to say. So I feel free to fire your questions into the Q&A. Don't everybody start all at once. And I think I just sucked the air out of the session by asking for that. So that's okay. What we'll do is I have oh, there we go. Karen Cole, I see. That's great. So Karen, in the chat, you asked Brian, what challenges do you typically see in implementing an AI governance program like 42001?
The biggest one that scoping what falls into the management system or not, and what do we want to put into that. I think a lot of organizations, this goes back to the strategic alignment of AI use within your organization, is, well, does this or doesn't this fall into the management system? Is this something that we need to have as part of that? Is something that I think aligning your organization, so it's it's scoping across a lot of people onto a strategy. So I think it's just the alignment and getting everyone on the same page, and having to work cross departmentally. And a lot of organizations don't have that. I would also say a lot of organizations don't have their data in a usable way. They don't have it. So like Copilot's probably one of the biggest and most common things we run into. I want to use Copilot in my organization, but I don't want to have anybody to have access to anything. So I have to go into the Purview account and do the sensitivity tagging on the data labeling. So data labeling, just kind of getting the basics and get the structure and the setup is even a hard one too. So it's less using the technology, it's getting the people organized to use it and come up with some like strong scoped strategy. So I'd say that's probably that's like step one and the hardest one to get off the ground for a lot. And then kind of once you get the ball moving, it goes a little bit quicker.
And then as a follow-up to that, Karen had a question about how long it typically takes to build that program, and how much should people sort of budget in terms of time and dollars for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it, I think 6 to 9 months is not unreasonable. With if you're hiring an outside consulting firm to come in and help you with the process, I would say expect to spend a minimum of, probably $50,000 to $75,000 total in that. And then the certification is in addition to that. So I can't like give all the dollars away, but how they do it is by people within the scope of the management system uh, gets to auditor days in terms of how long it takes to go through that certification process. So the larger your organization, the more you're going to spend to get it there. That shouldn't be a surprise, but yeah, definitely it just, I can help you out with quotes if you have specifics, but I'd say, 100 grand isn't a crazy amount of money to expect to spend for a fully baked ISO 40001 if you're hiring fully outside help.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Michael is asking, and Brett, this comes to something that you had brought up, is a private license for AI that keeps data out of the hands of everyone else using it. And so, can you just kind of review like some of the options for that?
Yeah, so we've talked about Copilot a bit, and actually a question above I think is about Copilot and it creeping in and that sort of thing. You have a lot of different options, but I'm going to focus on Copilot for a second. When they build it, they're you're looking for solutions that respect security controls, permissions, that sort of thing. So, like for instance, with Copilot, yeah, it's coming into the environment no matter what it seems. But on the other hand, it's generally built to respect the permissions models that exist within the organization, assuming you have good permissions. So, going back to what Brian was saying around, um, around the governance and making sure everyone understands, it's very important not just to have policies on a shelf, but to actually have an operationalized program that's functioning well. So that's going to be your first step. Your third-party risk assessments to understand, and your general risk, management to understand where the data is being held, what the permissioning models for the LLMs are, how the data is exposed, is all comes out through that. So to go back to Michael's question, yeah, there are private licenses. So if you're using one of like the OpenAI, enterprise licenses, you are restricting that data so that only your organization can see it. And in general, you only have access to the stuff that other people aren't going to see your queries unless you expose them as a public query. Like for instance, I know that in like the tool that George's company uses, it with AI, you can have private or public conversations that exist in AI, and you can make those choices, but it's about training the people. And that's not too complex to deploy. Like OpenAI, an enterprise account for an OpenAI is not difficult to deploy. For Anthropic is not difficult to deploy. Where it starts getting more difficult is depending on your use case. Are you only looking for generative AI, or are you looking to integrate AI an application that you have into a process that you have more programmatically, that's when you're really going to start wanting to look at like the offerings through AWS or Azure, where yes, that LLM is there. You have access to say, ChatGPT 5.1 or 5.2 or 4.5 or whatever ones you want to use. But it is much more privately contained in that tenant that you own instead of and removes that visibility even of the queries and conversations you're having from OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. Does that make sense? So yes, there's private licenses. I would say that your basic consumer license, or I'm going to put in finger quotes, business license, is not going to be what you're looking for there.
And that's if you decide to do something like a self-hosted LLM, expect to pay a lot of money for the privilege of hosting it yourself, because it requires a lot of compute resources, and that's not CPU, that's GPU, that's ASICs, that's a major league horsepower that you have to have at your disposal.
Yeah, Josh, if I could add one thing,
Yeah.
the thing I would also consider is a lot of tools are coming to the market with AI built into them. And this is where it gets back to third-party risk. So like Confluence and, Atlassian with Confluence and Jira, for instance, have Rovo. Lucidcharts has an AI, platform in it. Understanding how they implement AI and what the controls around it are for the protection of your data is important when you're choosing even these third-party platforms. So regardless of the value of the platform, you need to understand how they protect your data and how they're implementing that private LLM or not.
Is there a framework or something, a questionnaire out there that people can use to get the information that they need in order to conduct that evaluation?
I mean, there are like data sheets that they will provide. So I typically will take it from a third party risk perspective. I'm going to look at everything that's available from a trust perspective, and so that's their SOC 2s. Maybe their SOC 2s with that, like with CSA star level 2, that sort of thing, which gets a lot more into depth. Honestly, ISO 27001s, while I love them, they don't tell you a whole lot unless they expose kind of a little bit on like their statements of applicability and they show you their actual testing, which they're not supposed, which they typically won't do. Some people will, but you're trusting that external auditor, whoever that external auditor is. So I do believe there's a certain amount of review you have to do yourself, and don't just trust the masses, so to speak.
Right.
But as you pull down that trust package, a lot of times they will provide architectural documentation and implementation documentation or you can request it around how the AI is implemented and what the constraints are and what the implementation models are, if there's any agentic qualities to it, et cetera, so that you can make that educated guess. And I do say guess because it's educated, but
Yeah. And the things that you would be concerned about with things like data sovereignty still apply.
Yes.
With AI, where the data's your input prompt is getting sent in order to be processed matters still.
Yeah, George, you looked like you wanted to add a little bit to that.
Yeah, so
for sure.
one thing to add here is that MIT did an excellent job in publishing a risk register. That could be your basis. They came up with like 1,000 risks. It's a spreadsheet that you can download. It could be a basis for risk assessment of AI solutions, whether they're internal or external, part of the TPRM or something that you build. It's a really good starting point because it's almost like going down through the list and see which one applies. The other one is, speaking of methodologies that we already have, MITRE, the MITRE framework for assessment, really good one for TPRM, exactly about the case that we were talking. And there was a question in the chat here about ISO 42001. Yes, ISO 42001 has a section about risk management and how you do assessments. It's a methodology that is very, very close to what is in the 27001. But look at MIT. The other one, the UC Berkeley came up, they have a whole program called BEAR, specifically about risk management in AI. Also really good resource for different frameworks and documents.
Excellent. And the fact that they are the golden bears Had nothing to do at all with the reason why they call it bear. All right. So I'm going to take back the session, and because we are at 12, and I did promise to try to get everybody out by now, but I do want to put a plug in for our future webinars and conversations and topics. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you didn't, send me an email and I'll refund your admission. And so in April, we're going to be talking about reducing your cybersecurity spend and right-sizing your budget, and then followed by another AI-focused discussion where we're going to be talking about AI-based attacks and how to defend against those. And that's going to be May 20th at 11 a.m. So be there for that one. That's going to be a banger. We do like feedback. You are going to receive a survey. Please, please, I beg you. We read them. We take the input. We love it. Please, please, please respond to the feedback survey. It's 5 minutes or less. It's really easy. I promise. It won't hurt. And then feel free to reach out to us and contact us. We are available on the web via email. Our YouTube channel, which has been somewhat dormant in the last couple of years, is going to come back to life with a bunch of content. And you can always find us on LinkedIn. And, you know, drop us a note and say hi, or if you have questions that you want us to follow up from the panel, please do not hesitate to reach out. And for now, I will say thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening. And we'll see you next time.